We talk about them integrating and how it's completely fair to let a superhuman integrate into society, provided they agree to the social contract. I mean, when you think about Superman, Superman has pretty much every power under the sun. His only weakness is a rock, but he never kills. He never does anything that should other him from society. He was raised as a member of it. He's technically not human, but he might as well be. But when you think about vigilantes, about whether or not they should interfere with society, whether or not they have the right to actually use their powers and go and act and stop that mugging or stop that robbery and take it out of the police's hands or whoever. I think in a sense that they should have that right. I think when you hear stories about people who don't have superpowers, who don't have powers at all, and they do something like that, they're lauded as heroes. They become this great thing. And when they have superpowers, it's almost like they would feel obligated. They have that special ability. It would almost make it easier for them to do that. And so I think they can interfere with society because they're good at it. And if they feel obligated to do that, to do that for good at least, provided they're operating under the social contract, I don't see why we shouldn't let them do that. If they decide to violate the social contract and they kill, or they go about it in really shady ways, then I think we have a right to be worried and to be wary of their actions. I mean, everyone heralds Superman as a hero, but then Wolverine has to operate under the radar. And the key difference between the two isn't in their powers, it's the fact that Superman won't kill anyone. He'll tie them up with a steel girder and make sure they get to prison, but Wolverine, when push comes to shove, he will kill. And I think that is a big tenet of social contract these days. That's how we see it. Like, that's the be-all, end-all. And the fact that some heroes are willing to do that and some aren't is what lets them interfere.
Just like in the comic books, there are superhumans in real life. The real superhuman is someone who has a gift that nobody else has, or at least to a certain extent that others don't have that gift. Just like in the fictional world, a superhuman could be a good person or a bad person. They may save us from ourselves or from society, these superheroes, or they may be supervillains and they represent the evils of society and the things that we should strive not to be. They influence countless numbers of people. Hitler was a prime example because he was an average person. He influenced countless numbers of people to be on his side, on his, in his group, and it was unbelievably stupid to defy what Hitler stood for. And so that's another thing, possibly the last thing that the superhuman, a real life superhuman would be, is someone that is seemingly untouchable. A few examples of people that I would consider superhuman are Adolf Hitler, Che Guevara, Charles Manson, John Lennon, and George Carlin. Each of these have their own special things about them that made them super. Adolf Hitler, like I said before, his superpower I would consider to be persuasion. He persuaded countless numbers of people to follow him in, at the time, a less popular belief in order to get what he wanted, and he did it very well. Che Guevara saw the evils in the world. He saw the governments that were oppressing people. He witnessed these things with his own eyes, and he took it upon himself to, fix the world at least as much as he could. And so I would consider his superpower to be determination, really, in the face of something that seemed almost impossible. Charles Manson was another one of those that was he used his powers for evil instead of good. He was persuasive too, and he was a little bit insane, obviously. He believed he was the Lord himself and convinced these innocent young women and a guy or two to go hunt and kill people because of this racial cleansing. So Charles Manson would be considered one of the evil versions of a superhuman in society, and he represents the taking advantage of people who are vulnerable. John Lennon, a lot of people would think I'm going to say that John Lennon's superpower was songwriting, and it's not. John Lennon's superpower, in my eyes, is about his ability to take action. He had a stick it to the man mentality in a time that this country desperately needed it. He represented things like freedom and love in a time that there was hate and doubt. Through his songs, he persuaded a lot of people that freedom and love was an important value system. George Carlin was the man. He was quite possibly one of the funniest people who ever lived, and that was his superpower. He made people laugh. He would even use examples in the world of bad things that happen, and he would bring light to every situation. Yes, a superhuman can be someone who has a gift, like musical or artistic talent. It can be someone who has the power of persuasion. It can be someone who has a unique set of ideals, or just someone who has the cojones to stand up for what they believe in. Just as there are countless differences between Batman and the Hulk, there are many differences between real-life superhumans, like Jean-Paul Sartre and John Lennon. They both represent a unique set of ideals and things that we should pay attention to in society, but they are completely different. Jean-Paul Sartre talked about how the individual is just something that exists with other individuals. It is somebody who doesn't need anybody else. John Lennon, on the other hand, was talking more along the lines of human relationships, love, friendship, peace, kindness, all these things that were about others and yourself together, not so much about only yourself alone in a world that is completely isolated. And so, there's differences, just like in fictional world, there are, differences in the real world. Time period is a huge factor when you talk about the nature of a superhuman. If the Hulk was thought up 20 years prior to the time that he was, people would have been a lot more confused and not understand, because the atomic bomb was not a threat 20 years prior. It's all a reflection of what's happening in the world at that time, and real life superhumans are just the same way. If John Lennon had been in a time period that was 20 years earlier, 30 years earlier in World War II, he would have not had nearly the same effect that he did during the time period that he was, because people were much more in support of World War II than they ever were of Vietnam. He was preaching peace and love and bringing the soldiers home and defying this government that had defied them. But during the time in World War II and wars prior, the people were much less aware of the fact that they were being defied by the government, being lied to. And so he would have had much less of an impact, and he would have just been another performer. So, time period really does affect, in a huge way, how much a superhuman is a superhuman.